It was supposed to be a quiet celebration, a graceful milestone for a woman who had spent decades in the background of Britain's most powerful family. Duchess Sophia of Edinburgh turned 60 this week, and while the world expected a low-key event filled with royal politeness and hand-picked roses, what unfolded instead sent shockwaves through the palace walls because Queen Camilla wasn't there, not due to illness, not because of a last-minute conflict, but because Sophie didn't want her there. She banned her from her own estate, and that's not just unheard of. In royal circles, it's almost a declaration of war. What would drive a duchess to snub a queen consort? What history still burns so deeply that even on a day meant to celebrate peace, joy, and legacy, old wounds refused to close? This wasn't just a guest list issue. It was the explosion of a decades-long rivalry, cold, calculated, and always out of the public eye. Until now, while the candles flickered over elegant dishes and the royal string quartet played softly into the night, tension buzzed like static among the guests. The whispers were louder than the music. They weren't talking about Sophie's age, her dress, or even the food. They were talking about the empty seat, the seat meant for the queen consort. What happened that led Sophie to take such a bold, risky stand? What simmering resentments had finally boiled over behind the curtains of Bagshot Park? Let's begin this story where the sparks became flame. On the night Duchess Sophie decided her party would not be shared with Camilla, Duchess Sophie of Edinburgh had always been known for her quiet elegance. Unlike some of the more flamboyant royals, Sophie preferred dignity over drama. So when it came time to celebrate her 60th birthday, she didn't ask for a palace ballroom or a grand televised ceremony. She chose Bagshot Park, her own residence, nestled in the heart of Surrey. Far away from media flashbulbs and royal reporters, the celebration was intimate, tasteful, and deeply personal. Pale roses lined the entryway. Strings of warm lights glowed softly against the old stone walls. A string quartet played melodies from the Queen's favorite composers, one of many subtle tributes Sophie made to the late Queen Elizabeth, who had always shared a special bond with her. Guests arrived in elegant waves. Prince Edward, ever the loyal husband, stood tall beside his wife. Princess Anne arrived early, her presence always a sign of deep personal respect. Prince William and Princess Kate slipped in quietly, smiling warmly at the gathered faces. Even Sarah Ferguson made a brief appearance, despite past tensions within the family. But as the night wore on, one name was missing: Camilla. Queen consort Camilla. At first, no one dared say anything aloud. Maybe she was delayed. Maybe she had declined due to other commitments. But when dessert was served and her seat remained glaringly vacant, the whispers began. And then the truth trickled out. Camilla wasn't missing by accident. She was never invited. This wasn't just an omission. This was deliberate, purposeful. And suddenly, the entire evening changed. The scent of roasted lamb and vanilla cake no longer filled the air. It was the tension, the questions, the sideways glances and silent calculations. What had Sophie done? To most of the public, Sophie and Camilla had always seemed fine, polite, cordial even. They appeared side by side at royal functions, smiled at the same speeches, and walked the same red carpets. But behind those carefully controlled expressions was a relationship built not on friendship, but on formality. Cold, elegant formality. When Sophie married Prince Edward in 1999, she was seen as a breath of fresh air. She had no scandals, no complicated past. She was graceful, media-savvy, and instantly loved by Queen Elizabeth. Her background in public relations only strengthened her reputation. She understood the press, but she never chased the spotlight. Camilla, however, walked a very different path. She had loved Prince Charles for decades, but that love came at a cost. Her affair with Charles during his marriage to Princess Diana was the stuff of global tabloids. She was seen as the other woman, the reason for a broken fairy tale. And though time passed, wounds like that don't heal easily, especially under the pressure of public judgment. While Sophie rose quietly, Camilla clawed her way through criticism. One was embraced, the other was endured. Insiders whispered about moments of subtle tension between the two women, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, a cold glance during charity speeches. They were never caught fighting, but they were never close. Sophie had the Queen's approval from day one. Camilla had to fight for hers, and even after marrying Charles, she was never truly embraced the same way. Difference lingered. Like perfume after a guest has left the room, beautiful but unmistakable. all. Sophie's path through the royal family was smooth, too smooth, some believed. She fit the mold perfectly, loyal to the crown, scandal-free, dutiful but never demanding. Queen Elizabeth saw in her something rare, a royal by marriage who respected tradition more than she sought attention. As Sophie quietly became one of the Queen's most trusted confidants, her influence grew behind palace walls. Meanwhile, Camilla's journey was marred by ghosts. No matter how many charity events she attended, or how many public speeches she gave, the shadow of Diana loomed large. The public wasn't ready to forget, and some within the royal family never truly forgave. Even as Queen Elizabeth extended formal approval to Camilla, her favor remained firmly with Sophie. The Queen admired strength without noise, service without spectacle. Sophie offered both, but once Camilla married Charles, the game changed. Her rank rose, her title transformed, and the balance of power shifted with it. What was once a silent rivalry turned into a quiet imbalance. Events that Sophie once hosted now bore Camilla's name. Charities that once turned to Sophie now leaned into Camilla's growing royal status. But through it all, Sophie stayed steady. She didn't speak out. She didn't push back until now. The birthday invitation list, it seemed, was her first real message, and it was loud and clear. When Prince Charles finally married Camilla in 2005, it wasn't a fairy tale. It was cautious, measured, quiet. A private civil ceremony instead of a royal extravaganza. There were no balcony kisses, no global fanfare, just a long overdue union wrapped in whispers. But with that marriage came power. Camilla became a senior royal overnight. She gained access, status, and influence. And with time, she gained the title of Queen Consort. For Sophie, that moment marked a shift she never spoke about, but everyone close to the palace noticed. The woman who once stood beside the Queen at major events was slowly pushed to the second row. Invitations still came, duties remained, but the spotlight had moved. Then, in 2022, Queen Elizabeth died, and the world changed. Charles became king. Camilla, now Queen Consort, took a place on the throne that no one imagined for her decades ago. To some, it was progress. To others, including Sophie, it felt like betrayal. The old ways were fading. The Queen's legacy was already being rewritten. Camilla and Charles made changes, some practical, others deeply symbolic. One such change hurt Sophie deeply. They sold the Queen's prized racehorses, a beloved part of Elizabeth's life, raised with care and love over decades. For Sophie, who shared the Queen's love of horses, it was a painful signal. The era she cherished was gone, and the woman replacing it was Camilla. The divide grew deeper, and the birthday invitation became more than personal, it became political. Behind the polished smiles and rehearsed bows, Sophie had always been someone who valued loyalty, not just to the crown, but to people, to legacies, and above all, to Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen wasn't just her monarch, she was a mentor, a maternal figure, a symbol of everything Sophie believed the royal family should represent. So when Camilla and King Charles sold the Queen's beloved racehorses, creatures the monarch had lovingly raised and watched over like her own children, it felt like a betrayal, a sharp public message that the past no longer mattered. That sentiment and tradition were to be traded for efficiency and modernization. Sophie didn't take it lightly. She didn't make speeches, she didn't write letters, but she remembered, and that memory sat in her chest like a stone every time. She saw Camilla at events. Sophie's smile tightened just a little more. Their public appearances became icier. Even casual observers could feel the space between them. There were no friendly whispers between photo ops, no shared laughs, just distance, controlled, polite distance. Camilla, for her part, didn't attempt to bridge the gap. Some say she didn't even notice. Others believe she did, and simply didn't care. And then came the guest list. When Sophie began planning her 60th, she wasn't looking to make headlines. She wanted warmth, sincerity, and a gathering of people who respected her journey. The idea of Camilla attending wasn't just unappealing, it was insulting. She was determined that her home would not become a place of false smiles. Not this time. In the royal family, charity is never just charity, it's legacy, image, power. Both Sophie and Camilla understood this, and over the years, both women poured themselves into philanthropic work, just not in the same way. Sophie took the quiet route. She founded the Duchess of Edinburgh Foundation in 2002, years before she held that title. Her mission was clear: help children, support education, change futures. She visited schools. She sat with orphans. She walked through shelters without cameras. Her work felt genuine, deeply rooted in care and humility. Sophie. Camilla, on the other hand, took a different approach. Her focus was on hard-hitting issues: domestic violence, literacy, women's health. And while these causes were no less worthy, her methods were often more formal: grand galas, televised speeches, strategic partnerships. To outsiders, they were both making a difference. But inside the palace, whispers grew. Was Camilla trying to overshadow Sophie? Was Sophie quietly outshining Camilla? When Sophie began attending literacy events, just weeks after Camilla launched a national reading campaign, the media drew comparisons. Unfair or not, they stuck. Every appearance, every donation, every photo became a point in an invisible scorecard. Their efforts were never publicly pitted against each other, but the subtext was loud. And as Camilla's profile rose, Sophie's began to dim. Not because she did less, but because Camilla now had the crown behind her. Still, Sophie kept working, kept showing up, kept building something that felt real. But the feeling that her contributions were being overlooked, replaced even, never went away. It only simmered. There's something powerful about deciding who gets to sit at your table. Sophie understood that well. So when she sat down to plan her 60th birthday guest list, she did so with clarity. She wasn't just throwing a party. She was building a sanctuary, a circle of loyalty and quiet strength. And in that vision, Camilla didn't belong. Sources close to the palace say the suggestion to invite the queen consort came up in a planning meeting. A royal aide floated the poor idea casually, perhaps expecting an automatic yes. Sophie didn't flinch. She rolled her eyes, gave a short laugh, and said something no one had ever expected to hear so bluntly within royal walls. She's not coming. And that was final. Word spread fast. Palace staff exchanged nervous glances. Senior royals whispered behind doors. Was this a scandal or a statement? Camilla, upon hearing the news, was furious. She wasn't just offended. She was wounded. Being queen consort meant she had earned a seat at every table, every event, every stage. And now she was being locked out of one by a woman without a crown. For a moment, she even considered attending uninvited. A power move. A royal reminder that no one snubs the queen, but in the end, she stayed away. Whether out of pride or fear of being turned away at the gate, no one knows. But her absence spoke volumes, and every guest at Bagshot Park felt the weight of that silence. What began as a private party turned into a public firestorm. The royal family, already balancing centuries of protocol with the expectations of a modern world, now had to manage something far messier: personal pride. King Charles was informed immediately. As both monarch and husband, he couldn't ignore the snub. Reports suggest he was torn, angry that his wife had been excluded, but aware of the deep history between Sophie and Camilla. Behind closed doors, the pressure began. Would Charles demand an apology? Would Sophie be forced to smooth things over? So far, she hasn't moved an inch. And Camilla? She's chosen silence. No statements, no appearances. But those who know her say she's watching closely and not ready to forget. Royal insiders are holding their breath because every future event, every christening, funeral, public appearance will now carry tension. The image of unity will be harder to fake. And the cracks, once invisible, are now in plain view. Public opinion is just as divided. Some praise Sophie for standing firm, for honoring tradition, for drawing a line in the sand. Others fear she's opened a wound that could destabilize the already fragile peace within the royal family. And what of their legacy? For Sophie, it's one of quiet dignity, and now bold defiance. For Camilla, it's a story of survival, scandal, and power. And between them lies a silence louder than any speech. As the monarchy marches forward, one question remains: how long? Can a family built on tradition survive when those within can no longer pretend to be united?